You ever hear a story so outrageous, you wonder if it could even be real? That's exactly what happened when an HOA decided to send hired muscle to my quiet ranch, thinking they could intimidate me into submission. But what they didn't know was, I'm not the kind of guy who backs down. What started as a simple dispute over community guidelines quickly spiraled into a high-stakes showdown no one saw coming. And by the end of it, somebody wasn't walking home. The trouble started with what seemed like a small disagreement, but in HOA world, nothing is ever small. It began when I received a letter in the mail with a bright red "Notice of Violation" stamped across the top. According to the HOA, my old barn, the one my grandfather built over 60 years ago, was non-compliant with their so-called community standards. They said it was an eyesore, a danger, and a violation of the property guidelines. But here's the thing, this barn wasn't just some random shed. It was a piece of my family's history. Every plank, every nail, every weathered beam told a story. My grandfather raised cattle here, my father stored farm tools here, and I spent half my childhood climbing its rafters. So, I called the HOA president to explain the situation, thinking we could resolve this like neighbors. I told him the barn had been here long before the HOA was ever formed, and according to county records, the structure was grandfathered in. You'd think that would have ended the discussion, but instead, it lit a fire. The HOA president, a smug, power-hungry man named Carl, told me, rules are rules, and if you don't follow them, we'll make sure you regret it. At first, I thought he was bluffing. I ignored the second letter, then the third. But that's when things started to get ugly. They began sending me fines, hundreds of dollars at first, then thousands. When I refused to pay, they posted notices on my gate, warning that they would take further action. My neighbors told me Carl had been bragging at HOA meetings about making an example out of me. I still tried to keep calm. I figured the law would be on my side, so I gathered my property documents and reached out to a lawyer. But before anything could happen, the HOA made its move. One Saturday evening, just as the sun was dipping below the horizon, I heard the rumble of truck engines at the end of my driveway. 4 men stepped out, not in HOA polo shirts, but in dark jackets and steel-toed boots. These weren't board members, these were hired muscle. That's when I knew, this wasn't about community standards anymore. This was personal. The sound of gravel crunching under heavy boots echoed through the still evening air. I stood on my porch, watching 4 men fan out across my driveway like wolves circling their prey. None of them wore HOA badges or uniforms. These weren't volunteers sent to hand me another warning letter. These were bruisers. Broad shoulders, shaved heads, tattoos peeking from under leather jackets. One of them carried a crowbar. Another twirled a chain around his hand like he was itching to use it. The leader stepped forward, tall, scarred, and smug, and without even introducing himself, barked, "You've got 2 choices, cowboy. You tear that barn down by next week, or we'll do it for you." I didn't move. I didn't speak. Instead, I let the silence hang heavy between us. Out here, silence says more than words ever could. After a few seconds, I finally answered, calm and steady, "This is my land. That barn stays." He smirked, like he'd been expecting that. "Your land?" "Not anymore. HOA rules apply, and Carl sent us to make sure you understand that." I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my ears, but I kept my voice level. Carl made a big mistake. That seemed to set him off. He stomped toward me, pointing the crowbar straight at my chest. "Listen, rancher, we're not here to talk. You either cooperate, or things get ugly." I slowly stepped down from the porch, my boots crunching against the dirt. The late evening sun threw long shadows across the yard, making the moment feel like an old western standoff. My hand rested casually on the handle of the shovel leaning against the porch rail, not a weapon, at least not yet, but enough to send a message. I wasn't defenseless. One of the other men muttered, "Come on, "Boss, let's just wreck the barn and get out of here." That told me everything I needed to know. These guys were ready to cross a line. I knew calling the sheriff would take too long. Out here, help's at least 20 minutes away on a good day. So I made a choice: stand my ground, or lose my family's history forever. I took one slow step forward, closing the distance between us, and locked eyes with their leader. "You want my barn," I said quietly, "you're gonna have to go through me first." For a moment, no one moved. The wind picked up, whistling between us, carrying the tension like static in the air. Then the leader dropped the smirk and gave a sharp nod. The other three spread out, surrounding me. That's when I realized this wasn't going to end with words. The leader lunged first, swinging the crowbar like he meant to take my head clean off. I ducked just in time, feeling the rush of air as the metal whooshed past my ear and slammed into the wooden porch rail behind me, splintering it in half. The sound echoed through the ranch like a gunshot, sending a jolt of adrenaline straight through my veins. I didn't have time to think, only react. I grabbed the shovel from the porch, using the handle to block his next strike. The impact rattled through my arms, but I planted my boots and pushed back hard, forcing him a few steps away. Before I could recover, another guy rushed me from the side, swinging the chain like a whip. I pivoted, letting it crack harmlessly against the wooden post, and drove my shoulder into his chest. He stumbled back, gasping for breath, his chain clattering to the dirt. "Back off," I growled, but they weren't listening. The third thug tried to flank me, grabbing for my arms, but I twisted out of his grip and shoved him straight into the leader. They crashed together, cursing and stumbling, buying me precious seconds. I darted toward the barn, where I kept an old toolbox. My heart pounded, but my mind was razor-sharp now. Survival mode had kicked in. I grabbed a heavy wrench, its cold steel weight familiar in my hand. When I turned back, the leader was charging again, fury in his eyes. He swung the crowbar low this time, aiming for my legs, but I sidestepped and cracked the wrench against his forearm. He screamed, dropping the crowbar, and fell to his knees, clutching his arm in pain. That's when the other two hesitated for the first time, realizing this wasn't the easy job they'd signed up for. "Last warning," I said, voice low but steady. "Leave, now." But the smallest one, probably trying to save face, lunged at me anyway. Big mistake. I sidestepped, grabbed his jacket, and used his own momentum to throw him into a pile of feed sacks. He hit the ground hard and didn't get back up. The leader cursed under his breath, glaring at me through clenched teeth. "This isn't over," he spat, grabbing his fallen crowbar with his uninjured hand. But when he saw his men beaten, bleeding, and limping, he finally waved them off. One by one, they dragged themselves back to the truck, shooting me death stares as they climbed in. Tires spun, gravel sprayed, and within seconds, the sound of their engine faded into the distance. I stood there, chest heaving, shovel still in hand, the sunset painting the sky blood red. I'd won the battle. But deep down, I knew the HOA wasn't finished. For a long moment, I just stood there in the dirt driveway, shovel still gripped in my hand, my chest rising and falling as the sound of the truck faded into the distance. The barn behind me stood silent, like a stubborn old guardian refusing to bow to anyone. But inside, I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. When someone like Carl gets embarrassed, they don't back down. They double down. The very next morning, I woke up to find a certified letter taped to my gate. In bold, black letters, it read, "Final notice of legal action." According to the HOA, I now owed nearly $18,000 in fines and damages they caused themselves, mind you, and they threatened to put a lien on my property if I didn't comply. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about a barn anymore. It was about control. So I called my lawyer, a no-nonsense guy who's dealt with HOA bullies before. He laughed when he heard the story and said, "Let them try. They don't have a legal leg to stand on." We filed a countersuit for harassment, property damage, and trespassing. Suddenly, the HOA wasn't nearly as loud anymore. Carl tried to rally the other board members against me, but when word got around about him sending hired thugs, even some of his own supporters started questioning his leadership. Weeks passed, and the tension in the neighborhood was thick enough to cut with a knife. I noticed unfamiliar cars driving slowly past my ranch, cameras poking out of half-rolled windows. I installed security cameras of my own, upgraded the locks, and made sure every inch of my property was protected. If they thought intimidation was going to scare me, they picked the wrong guy. Then, one evening, I got a call from a neighbor who secretly sits on the HOA board. She whispered, "Carl's furious. He wants revenge, and he's planning something bigger." That sent a chill down my spine. Now, the barn still stands, untouched and stronger than ever. But I know Carl isn't finished. If anything, he's just waiting for the next move, and so am I. One thing's for sure, though, the next time they come after me, I'll be ready. Because on my land, under my sky, I make the rules. And if you've ever had an HOA nightmare of your own, I want to hear your story. Drop it in the comments below, hit that like button if you enjoyed this wild ride, and subscribe for more insane HOA case files. Trust me, the next one is even crazier.